Welcome to Trust Yourself, the podcast. The place where we learn that trust is earned and not given, even with ourselves. I'm your host, Betsy LaFay. I'm extraordinarily glad that you're here. Stick around. Welcome back, everyone, to Trust Yourself, the podcast. Today on the show, we have a very special interview with Adrien Gulliver of Moon Rising Magic. Adrien and I had been sort of randomly friends on Facebook. In fact, before we started recording the podcast, I asked him how we even got connected. It turns out he saw a live stream of mine and really resonated, and that's how we became friends. Well, immediately when we connected, I knew he was the perfect candidate for Trust Yourself Intuition School. So we have Trust Yourself, the podcast, and then we have the actual online course, Trust Yourself Intuition School. And, you know, it takes everyone their own time, their own timing to take the class. And 2 years later, on his birthday, on December 31st, 2021, New Year's Eve, he decided to sign up. So we recorded this interview in January 2022. You're going to hear us talk about how he's the newest Trust Yourself student, which is true. And what I'm really excited about is we're going to have him back on the show after he's completed the course, Trust Yourself. And I think it's okay to say that Adrien is rocking Trust Yourself. It has been a joy to have him in class, and he's working on some really specific things on accuracy with his intuition that are just really rocking the house. There's some things that I've mentored him in class in the Q&A that I've never had the privilege of mentoring someone on. So it's been a joy. I mean, we're recording this now, July 3rd, 2022. So a lot has changed for him since this last interview, and we're going to have him back, like I said, so he can talk about the changes that he has seen in his life, in his business, in his crystal shop, and his readings since taking Trust Yourself Intuition School. I hope you enjoy this interview. I finally get to see you and hear you, because usually it's just like one-way broadcast. This is amazing. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to join you today. I'm currently working on a business with my wife. We have a little project going on called Moon Rising Magic, and we self-collect minerals, rocks and minerals from all around the world. And it's one of our strong passions, and we look forward to sharing our love of minerals and all the positive natural energies with everyone. The handle on Instagram, it's moon.rising.magic.
So people who don't know what rock hounding is, it's a name that people give to people who go collect crystals from the earth. They tend to go to places where their crystals are, and they dig and collect the crystals. This is just me personally. I use my own sort of diction, and I have my own sort of language. I don't like the phrase rock hounding. I call them crystals, and I'm not a dog, and I'm not hounding after them. So, but it's also kind of, when people rock hound, there's various degrees, but a lot of times you'll go with a little pickaxe and hammer and stuff. For me, especially being the fairy that I am, I call myself a crystal gatherer, because I just like to go to places where the crystals are just falling out of the earth, and I just get to like pick them up, which I did today actually, with my friend. So, but I was so excited that you guys started to do that. You basically influenced me, because you had been rock hounding for quite a while. You've been posting like, oh, we went here, we went there, we got these specimens. And I'm like, that is so cool.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And so first of all, I want to know two things. I want to know what inspired you to go crystal gathering or rock hounding. And it seems to me that you were digging crystals for at least a couple of months before you decided to open up your own business. So could you share like those two steps? Because I personally would love to hear that story.
Right. So the height of the virus, during the height of that, I was furloughed for about 10, 11 months. And I just have always loved crystals, whether it's going to these shops or doing the little sifting thing at the amusement parks. I just
Mm-hmm.
loved it. So just one day, I was just like, hey, I want to figure out how these things, how they're formed. I want to know more about this stuff. And something just said, go out and just something that just said, go travel. And I got out, I traveled, as far as like an hour and a half, 2 hours north from my location. And I would spend 8, 9 hour days digging for crystals. And I might only come back with like 3 or 4 little crystals, but I come back, I would be a little, stressed out about that, but I would get over it. Something just said, hey, just keep going at it, keep digging, keep trying and keep studying because it'll turn into something one day. And came home with a couple more and I was like, hey, crazy idea. What if we try to sell some of these crystals? This could possibly be a way for me to be able to, help out just a little bit. And we gave it a shot and it ended up working out a little, here and there. And I was able to see like a positive outcome. I was able to see, it would have worked out,
Mm-hmm.
rather than wait for the cause and effect. So I was able to see like good from that, which was pretty cool.
What do you think was that little something that you mentioned? You're like, something told me to go travel. Something told me maybe I should sell these. What would you call that?
Right. I would call that my intuition, or I would
Yes.
say my inner GPS, as I might call it,
Nice.
because
Nice.
there's often I would there's a couple instances where I would not listen to the GPS and I would reroute it, just like someone were to pin in a GPS on their iPhone or their, mobile device. They
Mm-hmm.
just would keep rerouting it, and hopefully it would get to where you need to go. But
Yeah.
I listened to the GPS, and it guided me in a way that was helpful.
That's awesome. My favorite, I love using that analogy. And because you just took the how to trust your intuition in the face of fear, doubt, and uncertainty, how we talk about the map and we talk about the compass and how they're separate, learning to connect the dots and all that. With the actual GPS, my favorite part about that metaphor is that your intuition, like a GPS, will only give you one step at a time when you're actually like driving. So like if you're driving from California to New York, you do not want to know every single step of the way when you're like just heading out. And something, it's sort of a misnomer or miseducation about intuition. It's also like our desire for knowing and security. Like we want to know, like, what are the next 5 steps? And what I love about the story that you just told is you're like, something said go travel. So I traveled. Something said dig. And when you dug, you were there for like 9 hours and you got 3 crystals. And maybe those were like ones that you were proud of, but maybe they weren't ones that would go in a store, and you just kept
Right.
going. And then you're like, okay. And as you recalled the story too, you're like, I didn't run all the numbers. I didn't ask everyone else. Like I didn't wait until I had a stockpile of crystals. I didn't, talk to other crystal store owners. Like I just sort of like little by little put myself out there. And so that is the way, not only our intuition works, but just we as humans, need to work. It's the same way that like some people, not everyone, some people think it's absurd when they're putting a child into kindergarten and they're like, well, which kindergarten is going to get them into Princeton? And you're like, wait
Mm,
a minute, they're 4. Like you really can't be doing that. And it's the same thing that we do to ourselves, even though we're not 4 years old. We really can't be putting that weight on our shoulders. I mean, if you think about it, and if you can answer this as honestly, I mean, it's a hypothetical situation. But what if you heard that voice that said travel, right?
mhm.
And maybe you had, I don't want to put anyone in this position because nobody would do this in your life. But so I have a feeling your wife would play along with this, and she would never do this, but in this situation. So what if your wife was like, Adrien, you're going to travel? And you got to eat crystals? Well, you better be making money from those crystals. Like, how would that even like affect your trip? Like, you're driving to travel. Instead of feeling like, oh, I'm going to travel, like you're driving in the car, how would that make you feel?
Right. Well, I would say right off the bat, that would make me feel, and uh, on the trust yourself scale, I'm putting myself at an 8. So with that example, I would say that would get me thinking about that. So my mindset is thinking, all right, I need to find, precise crystals, very clean points, good color, good clarity. And I'm not thinking, well, this is fun, like, wow, I'm moving a lot of dirt, I'm moving rock, wow. But I'm thinking, oh man, if I don't come back with like a 5-gallon bucket full, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And that's basically my point. I mean, that's a perfect illustration. And again, we know your wife would never do that. She would never
Yeah.
be like, oh, you gotta. But so again, like with this whole intuitive thing to sort of read between the lines, and of course, if you don't feel this way, you can totally chime in. But just as you explained, you're like, when I follow that voice to travel, it was fun. It was like digging in the dirt. It's fun, and moving rock is fun. I mean, to some people that might sound insane, but I'm right there with you. I was doing it for hours today in the freezing cold. But somebody else might enjoy thrift shopping, or they might enjoy whatever it is they're enjoying. Moving around numbers. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or puzzles or whatever it is. And so it's this thing where I think, because I actually help a lot of people who either are entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs. Like, a lot of people want to leave their day job. They want to become healers. They want to become crystal sellers, whatever it is. And they actually do that to themselves, right? They have this joy, they have this passion. And then before they even travel, right? Before they even experience the joy, they have the idea of the joy, and then that inner voice comes in, whoever it is, and says, well, how am I going to make money doing that? Right? Like, how am I going to justify this trip? And what's interesting about it, and I, dare I say, I might disappoint some people listening who might want to become entrepreneurs. It's not like it's not meant for some people, but if you aren't able to follow your joy in it, then it won't work out. Now, there's a couple of reasons. Some people say this about graduate school, right? Where they're like, you had better really love what you're going to do in grad school, because it's hella hard and you're going to want to give up. So if you don't really love it, then don't do it. As Elizabeth Gilbert, the writer of Eat, Pray, Love, and Big Magic says, she says, you need to do it so much. You need to love it so much that you are willing to eat the shit sandwich that comes with it. So she's saying everything comes with a shit sandwich. And if you don't want to eat it, the next person will, because they will love doing that. Right. So especially in my early days of being an entrepreneur, I didn't know I had to be an accountant and a social media expert and a writer, and I didn't know I needed a secretary and all these things, and a tech person when I became self-employed. But I remember, especially in the beginning, it's not that I hate taxes. It just was like not my area of joy, and I had to infuse my love of doing everything else into that task. Because even today, I have an accountant, but I still need to get all my stuff ready for the accountant, right? So what I do is I'm like, I can sit down and do this, the stuff that I have to do, nobody else can do. And I'm going to know that by me doing this, it's enabling me to do everything else that I love doing. So it's interesting because I feel like the call to be an entrepreneur is a calling. Like, you just described it. You just like, it started off as like, I had time and I heard a voice and I didn't know where it was going. I didn't have a business plan. And it's still this source of joy. And we're leading other people in rock hounding and all this stuff. I just have to inject this, but Carolyn Miss is an amazing, intuitive she was having this interview with Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who is the writer of Women Who Run with the Wolves. And on Amazing, like these are like, of our times, these are like the wise elders. And Carolyn Myss said, she said, she's so bold. I love her so much. She says, the audacity that somebody thinks that I woke up one day and decided I wanted to be an intuitive healer and just know things about people and tell them things that they don't want to hear. Just like, I was like raising my hand. I'm like, yes, like people who are more closed-minded, let's say, you know, they look at me and they're like, well, I'm not so sure that you talk to dead people and all this and whatever. But it's like, I don't know, some people might choose this, but for me, I'm like, somewhere along the line, I chose it, and I'm eating the shit sandwich that comes along with it happily with a grin. Right. But at the same time, I'm just like, do you know how much this bugs people? Do you know how much this bothers people? Do you know how much this is confronting to people in this world? Like, It makes me so much more of an outsider, freaks people out. Some people think I'm a charlatan. Like, no, I would never choose this. And like opening up a business in the middle of the pandemic, like, sure, you know, being furloughed, which I don't know if you are now, it doesn't sound like you are. No. Yeah. So you had some time, but now you have a job and you have a business. It's like, would somebody really choose that? I mean,
right. Yeah. It's so much on top of another thing. And it's just like, yeah, I would not have chose it. It happened the way it did. And I'm glad to be in this, you know, current line of events. I wouldn't change it.
I'll just say one thing to like somebody listening who, you know, is desiring to be an entrepreneur or a healer or something like this. The one thing that people have to check themselves is, and that it's the same thing with grad school. In fact, you know, I've been doing readings for 15 years, and this came up so much more about 12 or 13 years ago. It was repeated. I don't really know. Oh, it was the recession, right? So we had the recession going. I was like, what was going on? No, it was totally the recession. And so around the recession, people would come into readings and they would say, should I go back to grad school or should I go back to school? And, you know, I don't answer any shoulds or shouldn'ts because there's no right or wrong. And I don't know the person, but it's like, here's what you do if you do, here's what happens if you do, here's what happens if you don't. But it's like, most of the time people were asking that because they didn't want to be where they were. They just wanted to get away from where they were. So if somebody's like, I don't want to work for the man, I don't want to do 9 to 5, like, I don't want to have these coworkers, I want to be in charge of myself. Well, what's interesting about that is that energy, that voice, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that, right? Like, you have to be honest with yourself. That is of an impetulant teenager, right? Yep. And I don't like to anthropomorphize the universe too much, but like, if the teenager says, Mom and Dad, when are you going to give me the car? I really need the car. And it's like, well, when you stop having that attitude and you mature, maybe you can drive. But if you're like, you know, something's pulling me, or I have this passion that like I lose track of time in, or, I mean, in my case, I was super resistant. And my body was breaking down when I was a social worker in the end. And so, I mean, there's a spectrum of intuition. It's all the same, but it first comes as a pull. And then if you don't listen, then it comes as a push, you know, and it's like, I had to get out and step out on my own. I had my own business at that point, but, you know, and that's one of the reasons why, you know, people who don't understand me, mainly my family, that I'm not in touch with anymore, but, you know, they're like, well, why can't you just get a even though this business is very successful. And I just say, well, my body will break down. If I go and do X, Y, and Z, like literally I get rashes, I can't breathe. It's not psychosomatic. It's my intuition that lives in my body saying, you're not doing the right thing. You know, so luckily I don't go back there anymore to those concepts. So let's talk about, well, first of all, I'll announce to the audience, which is really cool. You came to the last training of how to trust your intuition in the face of fear, doubt, and uncertainty. If listeners want to take it, it's available now for free. And you are the newest student to Trust Yourself, which is amazing, there's all sorts of different Trust Yourselves here. So we're in the podcast, but it's also a class that I teach. And you and I did not plan this. We had this interview scheduled before you decided to join class, which is really cool. And, we're going to go through the same questions that I ask everyone on the show, but we decided, you and I, that we'll ask you the questions now, and then we'll figure out when is the best time to come back and revisit these.
Okay.
But seeing how your answers change after you take the class, it's really cool that you're coming in when you said an 8, it's like on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you trust yourself, trust your intuition? 8 is amazing. 8 is like a really good number. And I bet you a lot of people are like, oh, I really wish I was an 8. And at the same time, the analogy I gave on the training is like, okay, well, you get on a commercial flight and you're sitting in the back and you hear the pilot, Betsy get on and be like, oh, it's a beautiful day outside. I'm 80% sure we're going to make it to the place on time because the mechanic said the computer online is about 80% accurate. And so I'll just let you know when we're flying over the Grand Canyon so you can take a photo. Like everyone would mass exit the plane, right? Yeah. So if you're walking around with an 8 and you're embarking on anything, that's we got to get those numbers higher. So, but still, I want to say like 8 is great. It's
Thank
super
you.
high for where we are. So, most people in the first question, say they're still learning and they're not exactly sure, but some people have some stories like, when/how did you learn to trust this voice? And I'll also say, like, don't you have like a more technical background, like engineering or something like that?
Yes. I have a bachelor's degree in audio music production.
Oh, great. Right.
So currently I'm an electronics technician for like touring acts and musicians.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, that's see, I wasn't aware of like the creative aspects of it. So I thought it was more just like computers. And the only reason why I bring that up is because there's been all sorts of people who have taken Trust Yourself and know how to trust their intuition, all sorts. But with the music leaning, okay, now we're going a little bit more creative, and that's just a little bit more easy to sort of drop into your intuition. But for instance, like not everyone, the way you described it is like something told me to travel. That's like akin to like build it and they will come. It's a not as big of not a tall order, it's just like, go to first base kind of thing. But like, how did you know to follow that? Like, how did you get to that place where you're like, you know what? I'm just going to follow this.
So how I got to that spot was after, so much time just sitting still or just not going out, I was able to slow down. I was able to detach myself from all the stimulation from like the TV and all those other, all the sources basically. And slowing down, I think it allowed me to be more open and receptive to the energy and to that voice, the inner voice.
Okay. That makes complete sense. So the pandemic didn't happen and you were just, act after act doing all this tech stuff. You wouldn't have had that time to listen and slow down. Do you feel like you would have even heard that voice?
I don't think I would have, to be honest, because going back to the regular routine, I'm back into it now, and it's 5 days a week. It's pretty busy. So there's times that it's 3 to 4 different shows going on at once, and there's maybe even 2 coming back as you're getting 4 ready. So it's always, go and anticipate the next move.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm so grateful for that event.
I didn't think I was going to say this, but it seems like it's an absolute perfect time to take Trust Yourself. I say this as somebody who had a full-time job that was exhausting, a social work job. had my own business. And then on top of that, I had my own public access TV show that I did everything for. And so I know what it's like to be very busy. At the same time, it's almost, in my opinion, more important to develop these skills that we're teaching in Trust Yourself, because, I think, and you're not even, I'm not reading between the lines of what you're saying. I'm sort of applying this to the general population. Okay.
Okay.
If I felt it coming from you, I would say it, but I don't feel it coming from you. In other words, you're quote unquote doing the right thing for what you want to do, as in like, okay, well, things are getting busy. What gave me the voice was the quietness. There isn't that now. So we need to make sure this keeps on going. I think, and again, this is coming from somebody who's been there. And whether somebody's listening and like, I have kids and I have a job, or I have going to school and kids and a job, like all these things. What we do have control over is how we spend our time. And there are times in everyone's life where not everyone's life, but a lot of people's lives, where we feel like we have to show up to work more than we like want to, as far as like time is concerned, right? Like, well, right. It's a busy time at work, so I have to put in overtime, or I'm feeling pressured to, or whatever it is. At the same time, this is quite literally one of the steps of the hero or heroine's journey, right? It's this thing where if we don't get out of that loop of I have to's, then it's like, okay, well, what is this costing you? Right. So it's like, right. Well, I don't have time to drop in for the quietness. So therefore, what does that mean? That just means that you're going to continue on the hamster wheel that you're on, and it's going to get tighter and more uncomfortable, because if you're kind of resentful now that you have to show up, you're going to be more resentful the next day and the next year, and it's going to weigh on all of your types of health: mental health, physical health, spiritual health, relational health. So,
yeah.
Right? So I didn't realize what good timing it is for you. I'm going to tell you something. I wasn't sure if this would ever come up, Adrien, but, I looked back into, because I actually was just looking at something else, and your thing came up in my CRM, my customer management system. And I was like, oh, wow, he was on the email list 2 years ago. That's how I knew it had been years, because time for me, even pre-pandemic, and I was like, oh, wow. And 2 years ago, I personally knew that he was going to rock Trust Yourself. But it's really awesome because it's all about timing. It's not about me and what I think. And it's not even necessarily about you and what you think, but we can see how 2 years ago, the timing was off. I was like, I resonate with this stuff, but I'm doing all this music stuff, and I'm this and this, and then you get this big break, and then you're like, oh, it's quiet. Oh, there's this voice here that's bringing me joy. Like, I want this more. And now you're back at work, and it's like, okay, we're gonna rock that. So that's just really cool about the timing.
Thank you. I'm super excited for this.
It's really, really cool. So it was the quietness, which is amazing. I feel a little bit bad, and I don't usually feel this way, but I feel a little bit bad for the people who, I mean, you're a little bit in this case where it was quiet for quite a while. And now, I mean, I contact people to hang out or to interview them, and they're just like, I'm so busy. And I'm just like, wait, like, didn't anyone learn something? And tell me if this feels off. I feel like it's not necessarily the individual that feels like they have control over it, right? Like you said, like, right. I'm back at work. I do need a full-time job now. And all the musicians, they want to tour and they need full-time jobs, right? So it's like everybody's been waiting 2 years for these events. All the fans,
Yep.
I got sad over New Year's that I couldn't see the band that I wanted to see because it was canceled. It was appropriate to cancel it because the numbers are super high here. But everybody's waiting for this. But I guess as I'm talking, what I'm realizing, which is pretty amazing, no matter what you feel about the virus and all this stuff, because it tends to be pretty controversial these days, which is weird. Nature is showing us something, right? It's like, we're stuck inside. Everyone's traveling for Christmas. And then numbers go up. And then everything shuts down. And then we get to be quiet. And it's like, I see this as a metaphor for almost like, again, it's weirdly controversial that sugar causes hyperactivity in kids. Apparently, there's literally no scientific data about it, but ask a parent or give a kid some sugar and you'll find out. But it's like, as an adult, like if you see yourself as a kid and you're just like, I haven't had sugar, and then you like have sugar, you're like, whoa, and then the next day, or alcohol or whatever it may be, like you feel like crap. Your immune system is like, you need to slow down. And so I do feel like this is a mirror. I hadn't really seen it like this before. This whole spikes, everything shuts down, and then everything gets quiet again, and things are open, and you can just see it in the charts. Look at any chart.
Yeah.
It's at some point, each individual needs to be like, all right, like I do have this full-time job. I do have a business. I do have a wife. I do have a life. And where is the time that's going to actually nourish me? Where is the quietness that's going to give me the access to this voice? And what I will say, for your sake and anyone else, is that, I think there's a huge component of minimizing distractions to get to that voice. At the same time, after you kind of nail this skill down, and I don't like to put numbers to it because everything's speeding up. So just because it took me 10 years doesn't mean, I honestly mean it, doesn't mean that it will take you 10 years, because there's that whole collective thing that makes things a lot easier. But once this skill is nailed down, it doesn't take as much away from everything. In fact, you don't need to be away from anything. It's just learning that and getting over the programming. I don't want to get too much into it because it's all in the class, but I do want to give you hope that, like, you're not going to need to take a day or half a day or an hour or a week to put everything, like there's no distractions. I have to, meditate in a cave to hear my voice, to what is next, where my joy is. Like, sometimes it does take that. And I feel like collectively, when we start to see less spikes and more either a wave or a diminishing, doesn't matter which one, more of a sort of homeostasis of this is what it is. Like, we're either always half open or it's gone away or those kinds of things. That's when we'll have the equilibrium in our lives. But it takes each individual to do that. In my case as a social worker, people would be like, well, you have to get all this paperwork done. And I was supposed to be on the floor working directly one-on-one with clients for 40 hours. And I would say to them, well, if you want me to do all this paperwork, give me a paperwork day, because I can't be working with someone doing paperwork. And then they'd say, and so everyone has an equivalent of this at work. Then they would say, or I was like, or give me overtime. That would be fine, at the time. And I was like, well, they're like, well, I worked like on 2 to 10 or 3 to 11. It was really brutal hours. And they're like, well, you work, 3 to 11 and the clients go to bed at 10 p.m. So do your paperwork then. And my answer, you try to do paperwork at 10 p.m. after you've worked an entire shift with these people. Have you tried it? And they're like, oh, shoot. It's like, it's just completely unreasonable. But the reason why I bring this up is because there needed to be a little bit of talk back to the people who were putting demands on me, to the people that, my bread and butter depended on, right? I needed to tell them, this is unreasonable.
Right.
But we can make it reasonable. I have someone on my team who has a day job, and they're learning how to speak up for themselves. And they had a really good instance the other day. It was so good. I was so proud of them. Somebody gave them, parameters of the work they should do. So they diligently went and did it. And they brought it back. And it was like a day until like the event or whatever it was. I don't know the exact details. And somebody sends an email being like, oh, well, let's change all these things about it. And nobody can see the look on your face, but you get the perfect look. You're like, oh my gosh. And so this person, she like wrote back and she said, well, I can make those changes, but it'll take about 3 days.
Right.
Instead of being like, oh, I gotta get done and I gotta get done. And so then what happened was, you're like, oh no, that's okay. And then literally the next day, they were like all in a group, and the bosses were like, this person is a good leader because she spoke up for herself, because she gave reasonable expectations, instead of just like taking it like, okay, well, I guess I need to do this to keep my job. Right. It's like really regulating and giving realistic expectations about what you can and cannot do. Just like I did, like, oh, give me a paperwork day, or give me overtime, or let me come in early and do it, those kinds of things. So that does need to be, and that also leads, if we go back to the impetulant teenager thing, right? You're either showing up to work being like, why are they giving me so much work? But they don't respect me. It's like, okay. Or you could take some deep breaths, learn effective communication, and say, hey, that's a reasonable request. It will take me X amount of time or X amount of dollars, and they're like, oh, great. Like, this person's being authentic. They're advocating for themselves. It gives you more respect. So I'm very happy and just very happy and basically proud of what you're doing. I think it's really cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. You had mentioned sort of rerouting the GPS. Can you think of a time where that voice told you to do something and you didn't do it, and what happened?
So a most recent example, and this is a couple of days ago. Mm-hmm. So this has been on our radar for quite some time to go through with licensing and all that good stuff. So I'm working on these forms and it's all new to me. So I'm learning it, I'm studying, and I get to the point where I'm actually working on some tax information. And I get so stumped and I just start doubting, and I start chasing my own tail, and I was getting nowhere. Mm-hmm. And I honestly, it's been hard to sleep. Like it was hard to sleep. I fell asleep just anxious, woke up anxious, thinking about the problem and worrying and thinking about it, and just saying what ifs and the woulda, shoulda, coulda thing. It was not doing anything. It was not helping at all. Right.
But we'll unpack that more once you go through the class, right? It's like, what is happening there? Why is it happening? Because anxiety isn't necessarily a quote unquote bad thing. I want to hear after you take the class about, okay, here's what I can do in those moments. So let's talk about a time. Do you have another time? Because you already shared an amazing time, but a time when perhaps against logic, you had an intuitive hit or you felt something and you went for it, and what happened?
Right. So my other example, this was going back a couple of years ago. I crossed paths with my wife and we had no idea. We never met each other. So this is the very last year of college. I just happened to be working a concession stand selling item like candy bars, I believe it was, and she was actually selling flowers. And it just happened that, she bought one for me, and something was saying, "Hey, this is it." Like I was able to see, at least get a glimpse of, there's something positive ahead. I didn't know what the answer was exactly, but something was like gut instinct. It was like, yes, like, yeah, you experience, significant events in the past, but this is going to be it. So like just
What
following
did you
that and
do? What did you do?
so leading up to that, we began chatting, we exchanged the number, and I'd say a week into chatting, and intuition uh was just like, hey, like, this is gonna, I know, it's like, hey, I know you're nervous, but like, this is gonna be, it's gonna work out. And I honestly, I was like, okay, I want to go through with it. I want to trust my intuition, I want to give it that shot. And fast forward, everything worked out. It was wonderful.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Please tell your wife I said hello. And I can't wait to have you back next time and contrast your answers.
Oh, can't wait. I'm excited.
Yeah. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you so much.
Yay. This episode of Trust Yourself, the podcast, is created, written, and produced by me, your host, Betsy LaFay. Music provided by the amazing and generous Ben Talmi. Thanks, Ben. If you'd like to find out more about me and my work, and specifically how you can trust your intuition, head over to betsylafay.com. Thanks again for being here. See you next time. Oh yeah, and if you like the show, please subscribe and give us a review. It's one of the best ways to help us get the word out to other people like you. Of course, if you know anyone else that would find this podcast helpful, pass it along to them. Sharing is caring.